The following podcast is sponsored by Basico. At Basico, we understand your needs and pain points. Our expertise in CFO services, legal, finance IT, and people and payroll helps drive your business forward by inspiring change and challenging norms. We believe in deep explorative discussions and critical angles, the same spirit that fuels the Only Constant podcast hosted by our own Lasse Rindom. Discover more about Basico's vision and services at basico.dk. And if you like what you hear in this episode, please don't hesitate to share it with a friend. And now Lasse, take it away.
You are listening to The Only Constant, a podcast where we go beyond the usual discussions in technology and business and aim to explore more than explain. Join me for engaging discussions with a diverse range of global thought leaders as we seek to uncover new perspectives and insights in a free-flowing conversation. My guest today is Tom Reuner, and I am your host, Lasse Rindom. Hi, Tom, and welcome to The Only Constant. I'm very happy that you're here today, and because you are an analyst I admire tremendously a lot, and I've also worked with you shortly at HFS for a couple of months, and I'm just super happy that we get to have this rendezvous here on the podcast, because then I get to pick your brain again, which I really, really love to do.
You're far too kind, but it's most great being on.
So, Tom, an AI, or maybe I should say generative AI, is like a novel technology and a hype market, and both things tend to ensure that confusion is king. What perspectives should an enterprise, adopt to gain more clarity in where they should be placing their bets right now?
Now, first and foremost, as an analyst, I should be grateful there's so much hype and confusion. Otherwise, I don't have a job. So I think that's great
Good
news.
One.
But I think almost even playing on the title of the podcast, I think that what we're seeing time and time again, call it constant, call it something else. I think, especially in this early phase of market development, we always, as an industry, tend to talk about capabilities. People who definitely sort of like me don't have an engineering degree or anything, don't go on a little pedestal talking about technologies as if they understand it. But actually, from an enterprise point of view, it's the opposite. What's the outcome you're trying to achieve? What the business problem you're trying to that enterprise to help? So we have to fundamentally change not just the narrative, but I think the way we think about all this. Because again, nobody boasts, at least not on the enterprise side, buys technology. On the consumer side, certain people might do, but that's not the way we think or some of that we know from the enterprise side. So fundamentally, we have to change. But quite frankly, just put it in a broader context. And if you look at the big secular shifts, we've been through cloud, we've been through automation. I haven't encountered anything like the noise we have. Our first generative was loud enough. Agentic gets even worse. So the noise levels are difficult, which means also for the decision makers, it's so difficult to cut through the noise. And that's here where we have there to help.
But you're saying that this is like a constant that the enterprises buy outcomes, right? But at the same time, I think that now we've been for 2.5 years in this generative AI market where people have been buying technology because they've been told they should buy technology, right? So do we have to rewrite this outcome book, or do we have to rewrite the generative AI playbook? There's a playbook here at stake, I feel.
I think not a playbook, but I think we just need honesty. And if we look, I think a good example, the comparison to cloud. I think 2/3 of organization, and we learned that beyond cloud with most transformations, don't fully achieve the strategic objectives. So meaning often it's difficult and starts if you don't define the outcome, the goal, what's the different way of working. If you haven't almost got your head around that, how on earth you measure progress on your journey, how on earth you pick the right technology to get to that outcome. And that's always where the cookie crumbles. And I think we've seen that, again, automation, you and I had so many discussions on that we've seen it again. And yet again, we've had the same discussion on now agentic, not just generative, it's agentic. It's even worse because the conceivability, the impact, thereby the disruption could be even more bigger. But as so often, it's the eye of the beholder. And I think at times you just have to step back, think of the basic stuff. Where are clients really at on their journey? How can we help them? And again, defining goals and especially aligning technology and business objectives, that's so imperative. But often in the noise, it gets lost. And people, you've been there as a consultant, it's POC, some of them are craving use cases. But even the use case, this might help you to experiment. That's great. But again, is it more about how can we help organizations accelerating their transformation journey? Then we have to think very differently about it.
Yeah, because there's a thing with, and I'm not bashing at analysts here, or you, or anyone. Maybe it's
at least
a whole market thing.
For a while.
No, but don't attack the player, attack the market, right? But there's a thing with making up new words all the time. So it seems like whenever people are starting to get around with what is a chatbot, then we invent AI workflows, and then we have to invent agentics, and then we keep on just pushing the boundaries. Say, oh, there's this new word you didn't hear about that. Oh, maybe you're just behind. That's why you haven't gotten to value yet because you're not on the forefront, right? But I think that in the last an episode I just recorded recently, but I haven't published yet, I spoke to Catherine Gulden-Lemaire about ethics, and she said ethics is about first asking the question from a purely classical way. The Greeks said, is it real? Is it true? And then you can ask, is it right? And are we missing out on these first two? Is it real and is it true? Are we sort of just saying this is right for you, but we haven't even decided if this actually works yet?
No, I mean, before even jumping into ethics, I think it's literally looking what's the real, how shall we think about agentic? How much autonomy is there? How much agency is there?
Is it real?
And it's real. Is it? I think that typically a consultant or analyst answers in the eye of the beholder. But if you listen to the market noise, stuff I'm reading out there is literally almost next year. Literally, these agentic agents have a conscience. So it's sometimes we have to step back and just look really where we are, what really is the impact of those technology. That's a job. I feel as a consultant, as analyst, where we have to help our clients to get a sense of reality. And the reality, at least you and I have you have less than I, but I have a lot of gray hair. So we have more experience. So we can look back, at least we have some comparisons. I think that's always, if you look in isolations, and typically anything which sounds good to be true, it's typically not true.
Have enterprises made these thousands of agents, right? Some people write that. Everyone's moving on. I haven't seen them yet. I haven't seen a lot of. I've seen AI use cases. I've seen people do chatbots, right? I haven't seen fully agentic solutions. I've seen SAP. They're still wrestling a little bit with it. I've seen something from Microsoft and from the big ERPs. I haven't seen any enterprise successfully build a really big AI-driven agent yet. But
no, we hear about it, but we haven't seen the demos. I'm with you. I think we see the demonstration from the big ISVs, from the big service providers, but that's kind of the internal optimized ways of all the things they know. I think the things we have to almost encounter, be realistic about. I think it's not about even implementing all those technologies in digital native organizations, quite young organizations, but organizations, public sector organizations hold back by technology, process, and even cultural debt. That's the reality. And that's almost, and again, we don't throw out, it's always, it's the equation always end. It's not one concept supplanting another, but how do you integrate that? And again, that only makes sense provided we have those questions of literally why we're doing that. Then are the classical golden diagrams of context or methodology. And we're back to the outcome you're trying to achieve.
But it reminds me, I spoke to a friend the other day where we spoke about this whole, you can't be negative around generative AI. Some people like, just be positive, look at the possibilities. People should see the possibilities. But it also feels like, okay, but I believe that this will actually happen on its own. It should be able to, it should be something that can, run up the hill and not just down the hill when I push it. So there's this tendency right now that we need to push it to start, don't you think? Or that everyone's talking it up all the time. Where I think we need to start also asking some of the questions about exactly as you say outcome and say, I'm good with let's do this generative AI thing, but let's try to demand a KPI, right?
Now, again, if you don't know the outcome, how are we going to measure it? I think productivity is so hard to measure, and that's why organizations struggle. Because if you can't measure it, how do you demonstrate the value up to almost your superiors? It's so damn difficult, if not impossible. So exactly that. So I think we're going to literally be dancing around the same issues yet again.
Yeah, but so how is this actually? And now I know you live very much deep in knee deep, probably even more knee deep than me, also because of the gray hair that you mentioned before.
How dare you? How dare you?
No, but I also want to say that you're actually like me, an educated historian. So we have this time
or failed historian, exactly.
Yeah, we're failed historians. But time is very much a construct and something we just move around in freely, right? But just asking someone like you then, as an analyst with 25 years history as an analyst and a history PhD actually, so you even went further than me there as well. Is this AI hype different from the previous hype cycles, and how is it different? I'd like to ask you that.
I think it's different in terms of magnitude, but also it's pretty much applicable to everything we do in IT, broadly speaking. It's literally the way we develop software, the way we think conceivably about processes, all the way to automation. So the way it can be applied, it's almost universal. So I think that's probably also because noise level, is aspiration. It's a gold rush because people try to make money. That's why we have so much hype. I'm called Dr. Doom far too often because people said, "Tom, get out of the way. We have to make money with this stuff." But I think then we are back to literally some of helping people to almost go back. And it's not just, again, it's not any innovation has to be applied in an organization. And again, you have to ask yourself literally what is the opportunity? I mean, if you look at agentic, the opportunity to almost on one hand leverage generative, just literally have language as a way to address almost problem statements, everything else. That is highly welcome because I think while I think I'm very coy, and I think that's probably euphemism on the whole, I must talk about democratization and everything else around those topics, because if I'm a process owner, the last thing I want people literally filling around in my process. I want the innovation. I want people to make suggestions. But the last thing I want anybody trying to drive change without a clear governance framework around in a clear process. So that's always a big one. But then also looking at almost the broader context, the agentic suggestion or what it could be is literally helping us to automate without fully to standardize. In the past, where we literally drove automation is about standardization.
We dreamt about that so many times, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So we came with new tools, but fundamentally it was the same process, just being more effective or efficient at standardization. So conceptually, agentic has the opportunity to almost go beyond that. But the big one is then also where the whole notion of agent orchestration cuts in. That's, again, difficult. It's not just difficult from a technology point of view. How do you integrate the disparate set of technologies? Again, the more modern they are, the easier it gets with clearly defined APIs and all the good stuff we hear about, frameworks like MCP, other stuff. So we will see progress. But again, we have to go almost to two things we have to figure out. From an enterprise point of view, again, we're back to governance, how we think around that. And it's complex. We mentioned earlier, ethics or legal or technology aspect are just one part of a complex set of issues around governance. And it should be outcome driven. Just like an organization, you have to figure out the outcome for using technology. The same way that if we think about some of adopting things like agentic AI, we need an outcome-centric governance. Good example, if you define literally AI as an asset, but crank it to almost a ServiceNow platform and literally find a way to operationalize that and to have the robust deployment. But then again, the probably at times it feels like almost philosophical question, and you and I as a field historians probably not a bad place to talk about that one. It's all about decoupling routine service delivery with labor arbitrage. That's a bigger picture. How much or how little? And I think that's where we're back, where the big impact can be. Because if you fast forward, many will argue almost over time, and if you look somebody like Accenture saying there's a forecasting in 2030, it's just 5 years out. For most organizations, half organizations, any interaction with technology will be primary through a piece of technology, not human anymore. The fundamental shift. In the past, it was so much cheaper and easier to throw people, especially in low-cost location, of course, at problems rather than solving big issues. And that is starting to flip. all the way some people will say, we don't need software anymore. We don't need people all these delivery locations for the big process issues anymore. Allegedly, it's all somewhat being done by technology, agents, and whatever the next evolution is. But as so often, the evolution is slower than most expect. And it's never supplanting.
It also feels like we always just doing arbitrage or replacement on the current functions we have right now, and then in 5 years we'll have new functions. We didn't think about them, so we're doing something else again, right? So my favorite example is also always how many employees in the banking and accounting sector that were laid off because of Excel, right? But they were all rehired times 3 a couple of years later, because now we didn't just want yearly statements, now we wanted half-year statements, quarterly statements, monthly statements, live dashboards, right? So it just kept on increasing the complexity, right? And don't you think the same thing is happening? It just seems so. It seems from a historical perspective and looking that way, it just seems like that's an inevitable thing, right? We need people to be occupied with things.
The smart organization from the word go, look at how can we create value. Probably not just with AI, but in general, but especially if you look at just as productivity and especially generative with Copilot will be raised to the bottom on one hand. But then again, also, we're not only talking about enlightened organization who care about their employees or even look at value. You're looking at my favorite example. So you hear about these alleged case studies where people say, we don't need people anymore. Like the financial services organization Klarna said, we're cutting so many people, we don't need them anymore. Then very recently, they had to eat a lot of humble pie. Said, we just played literally to the investor gallery and this and that. Life's much more complicated. But there's more than that, because I think that as long as we look at automation, the impact on a shift of activities, not always broad job displacement. It's always part of the discussion, and it's fascinating because there are these seminal studies like from the likes of McKinsey out. So if you sell the stuff, you point at the study saying, the target addressable market, the potential is huge. But if you look from the other side, if you're an employee and if you're a bit concerned about society, the same report also says, hey, there's so much potential displacement of at least activities, if not jobs. So almost the same report. Again, we're back to which lens you look at the stuff. And I think it's complex answers. But I think, again, we should always avoid simple answers. And not least in the context of innovation, all too often, if you raise societal question, impact on jobs. Almost you looked at like a Luddite. Again, I said before, I called Dr. Doom for far too often.
Yeah. But Dr. Doom is cool. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with Dr. Doom, because Dr. Doom is also, if you believe this will go to scale, I've said this often also on the podcast, if you believe this will go to scale, you will also be the one looking at the pitfalls, because you'll think this will be everywhere. What's going to happen with it? So I think actually a Doom perspective can also be a hype position, to be honest, right? But one of the things I'm always thinking about, and it also brings me to, I think Robert Fuchs I had on the podcast. He built autonomous driving systems for Toyota in JTech, right? He said that automation should first and foremost always start by fixing the human errors. So that's where you put automation to fix human, and then they start doing things that we fix their errors, and then you get autonomous. But we're sort of just moving beyond that all the time. And that brings me to one of my key ways of thinking about this. I always look at, I always do this, and I don't know if it's a brain disease or something, but I always look at it in Titans and gods on the Mount Olympus, right? This is about some of the powers of order, right, versus the powers of chaos. And if we are increasing chaos, we're doing it wrong. Yep, and then we need to put the AI to help us reduce the chaos instead, because that's, as you said, before, you don't want to. There's no one who owns a process in a company who just wants to add more flux to it. He wants to have control of what's going on.
No, absolutely. And I think it's always, I think on one hand, you get the suggestion of simplicity, just do it, and you get to whatever the promised land. But to your point, if anything, and we've seen it again with all the other secular shifts, at least in the short term, we create more complexity. And I think what's so important is not just the complexity organization have to manage, but also they have to think, how do we prepare our talent? And broadly speaking, if you talk to the buy side, they don't never get excited about the hype. They're seasoned executives. It's always, how do I drive that change? How do I prepare my organization for that change? And I think that's, again, gives us almost good guidance on the issues we should focus on. Again, not the noise. They're at least smarter than I am, perhaps not as smart as you are, but at least, and it's always that.
To have impact, you have to realize something's impacted, right? Something's impacted when you have impact, right? I think people forget that, but people are like, no, let's just add this on top, and then it will impact everything without really messing up anything. It's messy.
It's always about process, people, and culture. That's the way. Either we get to special transformation, or all too often that's where the stutter at times even painfully fail.
But you also said orchestration, and orchestration can sound a little bit like, you were looking at some RPA orchestration. Yeah. But I also think there's something different here that I'm starting to look a lot on, right? And now I'm just moving in my thoughts here as well, right? But that's what I do sometimes. But also thinking that when you have an AI agent, you have to think that this is actually a semantic, sort of rooted like you machine that moves purely virtual, purely in a digital world. So how does this digital world look? So my thinking is, if you have a composable IT architecture made up of multiple different things that doesn't connect all of it, and composable has been, it's been almost, doxa for 20 years in IT, right? But if you have that, how will your agent move? Because its world will be filled of walls and borders. Don't we need some kind of, cross-process digital world now? Don't we need to make monoliths again, or knowledge graph like SAP is doing, to make sure that things are connected so these machines can move around? That's also an orchestration thing, that we need to actually order our world before they can work. So people think they can go in on something that's unorderly, but I actually think that to some extent you need to have an extremely orderly setup to make them function perfectly, the agents at least.
No, some great, and there's a couple of reactions to it. I think first and foremost, I think we have to reimagine what we think digital labor really is. We're talking for 10 years, literally we need some of HR guidance for a piece of technology and humans. With agents, also the way you describe it, I think that the urgencies it's ever more prevalent to everybody. But I think it goes much deeper. I think it's also, we have to think, while the suggestion always, we still need the human in the loop, but what does it really mean? I think we see already, especially on the supply side, organizations trying to take so much either entry level or many jobs out. But if you don't train young folks anymore, who's become the kind of the human in the loop, the supervisor of all those pieces of technology, if we don't train them over time, how do we capture that knowledge? You mentioned knowledge graph. I think while we sort of at best and even agentic, are they really reacting, understanding context? They don't.
No, but even if they do, let's just assume they'll do that, right? That's all the books are saying. They will end up understanding, have a better memory, long-term memory, all that. That's sort of like the high position that will come. So if we assume that will come, okay, and I do that sometimes. Say, okay, all my criticism aside, say, okay, we believe this will happen, and there's some things happen, and they're moving very fast. We still have this situation where the digital twin has to be even more pure than the physical twin, right? The digital world has to be, something that you can navigate with without ambiguity. And I think people miss that. And you see someone from like Satya Nadella saying that we need to go to more compostable, almost, I call it, architecture. We can just spin up new things all the time. But that will make it even worse for the agents. So I'm like, are we betting on agents, guys, on full autonomy? Are we just betting on make new stuff all the time? What are we betting on? Because the metaverse is an agent verse, right? Do you get my thought process here?
Strong on monikers now, but
but you get what I'm getting at, right? If you have this virtual world, it has to have some structure to it. You can't just say whatever we have, put an agent and let it roam free, right? Because it can't roam free if it meets a wall.
I think the key word you just put up is ambiguity. And I think it's, again, if an enterprise, you can't deal with that. I think we can do with certain ways of approximation. And we're back to almost where we started, where it even makes sense to deploy these technologies.
But ambiguity is the problem in enterprises, right? That is one of the big problems in data and contracts and everything. And that's also, if you talk to anyone developing AI agents, it's the biggest problem for AI agents as well, ambiguity. So what are we fixing?
No, not least, I think, to your question on integrations, there's a complexity coming, as long probably your own organization, you might understand your own complexity at best. But the moment you interact with other piece technology, including, even all the legacy stuff. So many people are still working for mainframes. The Lotus Notes is still alive and kicking. Yeah. So again, there's all piece of code. So even, good old RPA probably still has its place somewhere in that orchestration. But I think we have to be clear, literally, I think we're back to the outcome and how do we deal with that. There are ways of dealing with that. And I think, again, but you don't need, you need literally some of them are highly specific, then you have to have different approaches. You have to think about semantic graphs, you have to do your homework on data management, deal with it. Some of the, again, there's no
but it's just like digital is so liberal, right? We've been doing digital and IT so liberally for the last 25 years, but it seems like we need to have, 5-year plans like in, communist IT instead. But you see, my point is just it needs to be planned out much more than we're doing it, right? Because what you're saying is also, if I remember you've been asked once, is RPA dead? And I maybe it was a comment on LinkedIn, you said, well, RPA is only dead if it doesn't, perform the outcome. It doesn't deliver the outcome, then it's dead. If it still provides value, it's not dead. Period. End of story. Right. But if it makes the landscape now more what do you call it? More fragmented, and the agent will not be able to understand it, or then agentics will just. I'm just thinking about the pressure that agentics will actually be putting on enterprise architecture strategies over the long term, right? And also why this will not come next year, but also that it will come because you take maybe a completely different stance on your IT architecture. If you get where I'm going with that.
Sure, no, absolutely. And yes, this was me, I think 2016, before the IPO of UiPath, I called RPA dead for exactly the reason you called out. But you called out another, important point, because it's again, if people struggle just almost to organize their workflows, because you don't just throw a piece of technology in there, and it's broadly speaking still human and piece of technology, including all the legacy stuff, green screens, whatever you have. So again, agentic, it's not the silver bullet cutting through that, despite, many of my analyst presence and some of consultants want to be heard are suggesting the opposite, that literally some of them are, it's all whatever you have, then it's the answers to technology, process that. All the challenge we have to integrate, allegedly agents can take care of that, and that autonomously, almost you just have to tell them what you want. It's literally almost all your wishes come true. And again, what I said before, if it's not too sounds too good to be true, it's rarely true, if ever.
Yeah, but I've had moments where I remember one of the first pages when you did RPA consulting was to say, if you don't understand what you want to automate, you can't automate it. But I've had moments over the last couple of years where I've been like, maybe that's not true for Gen AI. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I am wrong. But then it always comes back saying no, because purpose is driven by structure and by understanding. It just is.
Seeing the progress with all those technologies is highly welcome. So again, we're not negative about things, but again, it's about not wasting the effort. What can we learn from previous secular technology shifts? So why are we doing the same mistakes time and time again? And that's, I think, what we come in. And we were trying to help organizations, not just to save the effort, save the money, and have to more outcome, because also life's difficult, because innovation cycle with AI are becoming so compressed. It's difficult to catch up. And again, the last thing you want, it doesn't matter, even incremental change, your competitor might have a huge advantage just through incremental change if it's highly scaled. So again, some of them it's the time to sit on the sidelines. That's a very dangerous game, quite frankly. So again, the advice is not to ignore everything which is coming, but it's a question of much the most prudent way of applying all this, because again, there's so much value it can be over time, especially if each agents evolve over time. You mentioned it, once we get around understanding, storing context, which is still so damn difficult, if possible. Most current technology struggle because, yes, you might have some pre-understanding of certain verticals or certain processes, but again, the moment you interact with some different piece of technology, then how do you store that? So it's a different game. So very few organizations can deal with that. But these are the issues organizations have to deal. It's a holy trinity. It's cloud, data, and AI, and we can't say it often enough.
But that's also, I think also what you're saying is that it all people are looking at this as something that could fix everything for them. Where we're like. But do you even understand what you want to have fixed, right? That's the problem, right?
Notice, I think my question, or my point always is, especially the examples, of how do we sense, especially as a non-engineer and people working process, typically not engineers, it's always, how do we have technology where we exactly know where almost a block process is in the process change, exactly where it is, what to do with it. We are typically now through monitoring, there's an issue somewhere, we know the outcome, the blocked invoice where almost somebody has complained, but typically the question is, tell me exactly where is this invoice. Broadly speaking, we haven't found. And again,
but it's like when you hire an employee, you also tell them what to do. So when you hire an AI, you have to tell them what to do, right? You have to train them.
And I mean, that's the probably biggest misunderstanding where generative AI is, because again, it's only the known knowledge out there. I think I just went last week to one of my old employees in an AI startup, and the founder was one of the luminaries, put it quite some of the tangible. Just imagine Galileo asking a large language model about his assumptions. So the stuff he hasn't seen. Of course, you get the answer, almost Galileo, you're an idiot, because nobody thinks like that. So again, you see the limitations easily and can take it up from there. So it's almost the average, and it's all the knowledge. If you ask somebody, especially coming back to your question on automation, can those technologies even automate scenarios they haven't seen? The short answer is no, because that's almost the limitation of it. Again, it's these technologies are brilliant because they can take so much information in. They're not doing things at scale we couldn't do before. But again, they're not going beyond all the stuff we haven't, especially if you think what non-deterministic automation really
but then
means.
You always get this creativity one. People saying, oh, but they can't. But what I'm always saying, if you ask it to infer between two things it doesn't really know, like I've always done this weird example. I speak to a lot of CFOs, so I do a CFO surfer. Yeah, it can write about a CFO surfer, but it writes differently about the CFO surfer every time because it doesn't have a concept of a CFO surfer. It knows what a surfer is and a CFO is. It can infer them, but it cannot give you the same CFO surfer every time, right? Where if you ask it about Descartes, it will give you the same Descartes quote all the time, right? Because that's a singular thing, right?
No, but it's come back to my point. I think we have to be very clear both what the autonomy, but also what the agency in those agents is. And broadly speaking, if you see similarities to the RPA discussions, when we had those discussions as well, almost it's identical. We kind of started with the hope that we're progressing towards end-to-end automation. Then are looking at end-to-end processes. What we ended up without almost being explicit about it was task automation and employee productivity. And broadly speaking, I think that's exactly where we are with agentic. And I think that's why I think it's highly welcome to optimize software, to optimize processes. But I think to get literally to end-to-end agentic interactions, and all the stuff. There's so much hard work to be done and so much innovation to be had. So only then we can progress. Again, we need that honesty, but also we need some of to call out where we already see some of brilliant innovation which help us in the short term.
So maybe spending more Gen AI on making developers faster, so we can actually fix some of the issues we already had in our backlog, right?
No, it's a great point, because if you think about, we hear the stuff from Google. I think that whatever the percentage is, 30% of their code creation is run through AI. That's great. Flip it to the bank, even quite a mature bank. Probably they're stuck in waterfall somewhere. So just getting to test automation, it's difficult enough to deal with all that. So again, we have to bring it back to the enterprise side.
Yeah, but it doesn't make sense if you fire at 30%, then it doesn't get you anywhere.
On top of that. We're back to the Klarna example.
If you keep the people at 30% productivity, maybe you can fix all of these things that doesn't add up today,
the counter argument is there's so much work to be done, but I think it's a lot of euphemism. I think on the buy side is always different, and probably is still the case, because there's so many things, so much backlog to be done. But then again, on the supply side, the picture is very different. That's also where we see a vast displacement of work already. We've seen it RPA, BPO, and we will see even more so with all the innovative technology, because that's unfortunately just some of the law of capitalism.
Are you, by the way, Tom? Are you looking at the new tech, new models, testing new models all the time? I think there is something where people are like, we talked about this, the dream of it, and they could come in and fix everything. I think Lorian Pratt said on the podcast some episodes back that this is because AI is the only business technology to have its own Hollywood genre. She said, right? So people keep dreaming, right? Are you looking at that, or because I've started to be a little bit more meh, because I still want to see it in use cases? Or how do you feel?
I think my parents called me Thomas for a reason, so the biblical doubter. So I'm very cynical about all this stuff. So I think because it's not about the Hollywood glamour, quite frankly. On the contrary, it's dirt under your fingernail, stuffy data entry. That's the reality we have to deal with. So again, we shouldn't get carried away. Not least also much more consumer use cases, scenarios, everything else. Broadly speaking, most of the stuff enterprise deals with, it's not glamorous. It's not it's stuffy. It's boring at times. But actually, if you think about the scale, here where the biggest impact probably will be, because it's boring, but it's scalable. Everything else is more tangible. If you think about, we all love what AI can do with our videos and pictures, but the reality is you're back to almost stuffy old invoices. That's the world we should focus on.
Yeah, exactly. So I get an AI that can do all my songs and all my pictures, but it can't do my dishes, right? So we need to get the dishes done. Get the dishes done, right? But also now back to again dreaming more. Is Gen AI actually the promised land for citizen developers? So we spoke a little bit about it, or is it yet another mirage? Is this something where everyone can now do tech, but can they do tech in the right way? And is it good enough to make code, or is it code only good when it works 2 years from now? Or
I think it's both. I think, quite frankly, I think any technology which helps us to be more effective dealing, with things, working through stuff. Why on earth? If you go back and look at how software was written years ago. But the question is, then again, we're back to some of how do we govern that? And I think again, the notion of citizen developer, it's just misleading. It's often marketing led, quite frankly. Again, if I run the process or have ownership of an outcome, then anybody, without coordination, without governance, then that's the last thing I want. I think it's typically more, again, back to marketing ideas, marketing voice,
it's a paradox
and reality.
Phrase. I believe it's a paradox phrase. Being a citizen and a developer, either you are owner or not owner or something. Either you're in or
no, absolutely,
right?
exactly that. So again, it's not the consumer world. We're just funky and fun, and we are so happy doing things. Don't get me wrong, it's great to have happier workplaces, but I don't think, again, the innovation coming from people experimenting, that's the biggest value. But we see that through hackathons, through other events being captured. But I'm quite coy on many suggestions on citizen developers.
Because prototyping is not all we do, right? And the only thing I hear from people developing these agents in these big systems, I also had on the podcast, is the testing phase is really big, right? Because you have unlimited capabilities, means even more testing. You need to test it for all different outcomes it could possibly produce, right? And then it doesn't matter, you could prototype it in 2 seconds, because getting it into production is just even longer than it used to be.
No, it is. And I think all the issues we discuss come together because, again, it's around, I think it's about assuring outcomes, assuring businesses what it is. And then when you ask the service providers how to deal with it, some will say, we post some kind of work documents on ethical stuff on our website, and I'm shaking my head. That has nothing to do with the outcome. Or the other extreme, talking about technology feasibility, understanding model drift, what happens. But again, this is just one aspect of the whole thing. I think we are back to almost the way we should operationalize AI and AI governance. And until we do that, I think people will make big mistakes, costly mistakes, end up in courts. I think often many people quote the example of Air Canada being in courts, and of course, literally one of their LMMs gave the wrong advice, and some of the pointing at, it wasn't our fault, it was a technology provider. It's outsourcing 101. It's your fault.
But I'm actually thinking,
more and more.
Are you saying to some extent that enterprises are not taking this serious? There is a thing here, because just hear me out. Stuart Winterchair said on the episode 2 or 3 episodes back that he hates these data and the AI departments, right? The AI analytics departments, because they always just put on the side is something superfluous, something to make the board happy, and then no one's really taking it seriously, because we'll still be working our tedious stuff and our Excel sheets and our invoices over here, right on the side. We'll be doing the dishes over here, and we don't want these fancy guys with their techno music interfering with our dishes, right? So is it because people are not actually taking it seriously that they're not demanding the outcome?
No, I don't think so. But I think it's underestimating the change. And I think it's because it's almost just quoting you. You talked about the complexity, the new complexity, and that's what it is. So until we understand that, I think there's almost a time and a place. So again, we're not advocating putting it to the side or dismissing it. It's the opposite. On the contrary, it's so important and will be so important. But the most effective way to operationalize that, and that's the most important word, operationalize, because that's a hard word. But because it's also, you have to bring all parts of the organization together, and that's where back almost where the transformation journey often stall, quite frankly. But that's the only way of doing it. And again, what we haven't discussed, what the literally the operating model for AI. We kind of got our head around the operating model for cloud to some degree, although people just literally burn so much money because they just upgraded their infrastructure and so that will lead them to the promised land. But if you think through working through AI and just quoting you, some of what's potentially could happen through AI, there's such huge potential. But when you have to almost, again, operationalizing mean also articulating what that different kind of working. If we drive that change, what do we articulate and drive and communicate to our teams through the organizations?
Yeah, how difficult has it been for companies to operationalize cloud and get that all set in the right way? And everyone's like, we don't really know our spend and why we're doing this and that. People are still like that, right? And at the same time, also, how many companies really have RPA in position for instance, it's been out for like 20 years now. How many companies have that in the IT department as part of the operational cost? It's still sort of a business project, right? And then you have something like blockchain, who everyone actually believes in, but no one's really operationalized either yet, right? And now we're talking quantum, and what's metaverse.
Blockchain? Just remind me. What's metaverse?
No, but you get me, right? I think I said it the other day when I saw the Google I/O. I said, there's this the gulf between what's coming out of the labs and adoption. It's like we're still stuck in, that X lookup is cool. That's the coolest thing we've adopted over the last couple of years, right? But things are moving so fast, so incredibly fast, and there's so many things we haven't operationalized yet. So how do we overcome that?
Yeah, no, it's. I think it's almost we're turning in circles slightly because all it's literally the issues we discussed. But I think it's having the right mindset. But also, I think they're not picking up on the viewpoint you just made. Empowering organization. It's not good enough just to placate and if you have an innovation, whatever council, without empowering to drive that change. And it's very typical. If there's no burning platform, people won't change. But again, I said also, I think the innovation cycles are so compressed to what the burning cycle of platform can change overnight because somebody literally says, we're disrupting the market here through innovation. So that part, and again, it's call it innovator's dilemma, call it something else. That pressure will come, and some of the time we had probably at hand a couple of years back, we'll look back and say, Jesus, we want to go back in time because we have more time figuring things out. That's a big challenge as well. So then the pressure to figure something out, to see almost literally avoiding somebody disrupting our core market or where we are playing, that time window gets ever and more narrow.
But also, we talked about how the whole operationalization of this. Sorry, I couldn't find the word here. But what about the providers here? How is generative AI revamping the whole IT services industry and all these operationals, and deliveries and BPOs and all that? What's going on here?
It's difficult to paint with a broad brush. I think one organization, which shall remain nameless, literally mandated that all their marketing materials rewritten has a piece of generative AI in there, which is bonkers. That was one example. I think
but in Microsoft, that's everything Copilot as well, right? It's everywhere, right?
Exactly. That's the other way. I think we see great progress. I think we progress, especially on the service provider side. It's around having this broad platform driving the integration of all these disparate models, because we don't, which foundational models are we basing it on? Then all the way to which piece of ancient technology, to put it mildly, to be integrated. So I think there's a lot of progress on that. But I think the biggest question for me, the holy grail, is around agent orchestration, where everything comes together. That's probably where value being captured. But the big question is, for instance, an ISV like Salesforce or ServiceNow, are they happily sharing that with all their partners, or who's keeping that as well? So just being able to capture that value is difficult enough, because there's all the complexity you talked about. But then also looking purely from a financial point of view, it's easy as an analyst to talk about ecosystems, but again, how are the spoils being shared or not shared? That's almost the key issues driving out. So strong advancement, a lot of progress, especially from these big platforms, taking the complexity out of deployment of agents.
So you're saying that the feeling of that it's commodity, but it's not commodity. People feel like maybe it's not commodity. Maybe we still have an edge here. Maybe we're keeping it. And
it is. I mean, it's again on the danger of going back where we were. I think that as long as you look just as productivity, is a race to the bottom. And even more pronounced on the service provider side. I don't think you can win that bottom, because your clients ask you anyway, just to be honest, you're talking about whatever savings you can do with generative AI or agentic AI. We want that as a part of the next renewal. So let's bake that in. So again, we've seen it with cloud before as well.
But I saw many of them coming up with these orchestration engines also, half a year after, the November 2022 thing. And I always felt like this was like, making orchestration for things we didn't know how looked. It felt to me, or, operationalization, frameworks feel like building parking lots or parking buildings, what do you call that, for when you don't know what a car looks like, right? And are we still at that stage, or do people know what they're supposed to operationalize now, or do you feel?
I think it gets better, but I think it's, again, there's always a huge difference. If you talk to people on the supply side, there's a lot of progress, quite frankly, because they're devolving so much time driving those models. There's a lot of good progress on that. But if you flip to the supply side, again, there's a scarcity of talent to deal with it. Again, most of the stuff is not even taught at scale at universities yet, so probably not surprising. And the enterprise are the last one, or some of them are to pick the technology pack, get the better talent on all of that. So again, we have to be very clear the differences of different set of stakeholders. And again, the relevant point is looking at the enterprise side, not so much on the supply side. The supply side is often the next shiny thing. They have figured that's their job. Literally, some of they're investing.
They had
a
year full stress after November 22, where they were taken by surprise. All of them, close follows of technology, but no one knew this was happening. I remember that was quite stressful for all of the IT services globally, right?
Absolutely,
trying to adjust to something that they felt they should have known beforehand. Right? But also, something like services as a software. Is IT services now something more broad? I've asked this also of SAP and Business Central on the podcast. That are we outsourcing services now to software vendors, or because we're not outsourcing, if they take over with an agent, take over the process, they're sort of taking over the whole thing.
It's literally passing on one hand is exactly the same discussion we had with RPA, because it's decoupling routine service from labor arbitrage. We talked more than 10 years back of virtual engineers, not just RPA, but technology like IPsoft, my old chums at Arago. So on one, it's the same discussion, but I think if you listen in, if IBM talks also consulting as a code, so big even transformation project, which can be codified. So again, it's not just a world of agentic where some piece of technology is solving problems, but I think the other notion of the other element of that is that a lot of these complex services can be codified. I think that shift is already happening. I think it's, but again, we have to look at where it's happening. It doesn't mean India is dead, just to almost be provocative. It's the opposite. If you look at where the global talent for AI is sitting largely in India, quite frankly, for instance. So again, that doesn't equate to that India is dead. Of course, people just sitting in call centers or do manual intervention. That's exactly where the big impact will be. But the question also is time horizon. Again, back, I think I quoted some of the analysis of Accenture saying how much in 5 years' time, 50% of organizations will interact internally to technology, which is, keeping in mind, of course, Accenture is leading with innovation. They have to say that to some degree as well. Yeah. But I think it's coming, and there's a fundamental shift coming. But again, we can ask the next one, how as society, some of how much work is there for everybody? Some of how much value we place at work. And again, we are back to some of and we had the discussion ever since RPA. Finland has introduced a minimum wage, but again, some of often on the technology side, that kind of quite reflective thinking is being dismissed because literally almost you run to the Luddite, because the standard argument is that almost jobs are not being taken away. But I think if you look at the potential of those technologies, the opportunities for almost where people can work in the future will shrink significantly.
And we need to figure out because effort is linked to meaning, right? So we need to figure out another way to put effort into things, right? And that's the difficult thing for humans, right? It's not just about getting the new flat screen; it's about actually having to go through a little trouble to get it, right?
No, it is, and probably not sure about you. Some of I have a big family, and I always ask, the younger generation, "Hey, Uncle Tom, you're an old guy. What do you advise me to do?" And it's always called counterintuitive. Then I go for the left brain stuff because, back of my mind, again, being the failed historian here, but I'm thinking about ancient Rome and some of we had the circus to entertain people, because if they're not were at war, they had to be entertained. I think I wouldn't be surprised over time. The question how I don't think in the next 5 years, but over time, there won't be enough work. So we have to think as a society, literally how we deal with all our people around there.
Buy a lot of lions. That's what I'm hearing you say, Tom. Yeah. Buy a lot of lions. They'll be bought by the Colosseum in a couple of years, right?
For instance.
No, but I think that's brilliant.
If I would know anything, I would have invested in it. So my pension would for once being taken care of. So I'm the wrong guy to give advice on that one.
Because you're not that old, Tom. You still make the circus Reuner, right? That would be great. I love that. Yeah. But I think that the whole what you're saying really resonates, because I'm also saying, okay, let's just assume beyond productivity, that we'll go beyond productivity and what will be there, and that will be all of the things about assurance, advisory, entertainment, guarantees, all the things that is ours, right? I always quote the Bible in some way, saying that maybe God created everything, but Adam still have to give name to it, because he has to say, what's the value of it? Where does it fit in my world? And we still need to, and that's what we need to focus on. What's the
But I think that's for me also the job, both as consultant, or I think we have to translate all that technology in a relevant language and meaning for the various
value.
stakeholders, because again, it's not as simple. It's never about technology. Again, we're definitely going in circles because we started there. But that's exactly that. We have to translate that. But also being honest, where we see things not, because to your point, productivity, the smart organizations like Tiger, the former CEO of Genpact, he was dead on. He said, look, I told my teams, look for value in all those, call it use cases, also what you call it assessment, where Gen AI could be applied. And that's where the smart organizations are, focused on value, not productivity.
Yeah. Sorry for going in circles, Tom, but I don't think it's circles.
Absolutely.
I think it's more like helixes, or what should we call it, or infinity.
Anything
signs.
which we can put on a PowerPoint slide, I'm a happy man.
And I mentioned in PowerPoint, right? I remember you always said that the short time we worked together, that is not rocket science. I think I've heard you say that 1,000 times, right? And I also think that you've seen so many provider PowerPoints, right? Because you're an analyst, so you see that all the time. They come to you asking for, are we positioning ourselves the right way? And I just want to know, how would the it's not rocket science AI PowerPoint look for Tom Reuner? If you had to do it yourself.
It's client centric, discuss outcomes and be clear how you measure progress. But that's exactly where most of those presentations fall down, because you called it out. You haven't seen a client journey on agentic as yet. Again, at the moment, we're still fanning the noise, fanning the aspirations. But it's that almost tell the story through the eyes of your customers. Don't talk capabilities. It's be realistic how the buy side thinks about that.
So would you even make an AI PowerPoint that way? Because it sounds like this PowerPoint you're making, it could also be done for RPA or for cloud or whatever. So when would you put AI into it?
I literally went on stage on last Friday, and I said probably people wouldn't even notice if I had taken my old slides from RPA and just changing monikers. So I think that's almost, as your podcast is called The Constant, there's some constant in that. So
Tom's your PowerPoint is actually the only constant. I love that.
Gosh. No, I would never dare to say that.
But my point is, how would you add AI to that mix? Where people would expect you to do that today, where would it put? How would you put it in? Would you put it in just with all the rest of the technologies? The world is saying this is novel, this is changing things. Microsoft is betting their lives on it. Tom, are you just saying, no, it's just like the rest of it, just the value?
It's you have to take advantage of those technologies as an analyst, as a consultant. The way I can learn. Just get turbocharged with all of the innovative technology. I can learn so much that can help me explain stuff I literally had no clue about, like so many things. But I can find ways of learning so much faster. So that's the most easy bit. With those technologies, if I ask to develop a slide for X and Y, you get typically quite a structured way, not even overly creative. I know there's specialist tools out there helping with even that, and we will get there over time. But again, we are back to the same discussion we had on what's a generative, what it isn't. Anything which it hasn't seen, any AI tool, even the most advanced AI for creating a PowerPoint won't come up with. This will always be something it has seen or can correlate. But again, it's not the creative thinking, the lateral thinking we as humans can do. And I'm glad, because I think that's the last value the analysts
but
still have.
It's just the weird thing is for a consultant, right? And you must get something like this as well, right? I go out to clients and I like to get into a discussion about their problems, challenges, and their concrete opportunities, right?
Yeah.
But they also invite me as an AI lead to say, let's talk about AI. Oh, can we see you talk about AI? And then, of course, I can do a dance, right? But then you're back to the entertainment, and I'm in the Colosseum, and I don't want to be there.
No, because if you do the dance, you have to run fast. The question how quickly you have to come back to those guys. It's all the issues we discussed. It's about operationalizing stuff. That's the hard bit. It's the glossy things, all the things you could conceivably do with any innovation. That's a fun bit, but almost again, that doesn't create value.
Hype is looking at your own, right? Why didn't we adopt the last hype cycle? I think that's what enterprise needs to look at, right? It's about
exactly we can learn. I think we can, again, as a failed historian, it's not, I don't think history repeats itself, but there's many lessons we can learn. And that's almost my point. I think to look at those lessons and you're back to them, it's not rocket science, it's that, because it's not rocket science. It's, if you remember, it's people, culture, and process. You learned a lot.
But it's the same thing with, I always say with partners, right? So you have a partner and you get tired of it and you find a new one, but then it's good. But then half a year later, it starts being, it's a little bit like the same. And then a year out, and in the end, if you've done that 10, 20 times, you find out it's people, process, culture, and it's your people. It's your processes and your culture. That's the problem, right? And maybe it's not the hype tech. Maybe it's the things you need to look at and get in order, right? In the background, right?
Exactly.
Tom, this has been a terrific conversation. I've loved having you on.
I really
I've loved
enjoyed it.
speaking with you again, and I hope we get to speak a lot more in the future as well. You are not
Absolutely.
as old as you've been letting on here, and you don't have that many gray hairs. So people don't see you, but only hear you. I just want to make sure they don't feel like we're talking to someone who is ancient here, but definitely with ancient knowledge at least. But Tom, I have one final question for you, and I know you've been looking forward to this one.
Absolutely.
So, Tom, what is the only constant?
Gosh, probably until last week, I would have said some of my football club not win the trophy. But hey, they won the trophy. That's one gone out the window, so don't ask me any question. That's a simple one. But on a slightly more serious side, it's probably not the usual, it's all about change. I think it's the other way around, but I think in a more realistic way, I'm a practicing deliverer. It's uncertainty. And I think it's how do we deal with it on all levels. It's if you think about a big belief system, some of my Bible is Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And I think I don't think there's certainty. There's no 42 out to the answer of the universe, life, and everything else. Unfortunately, it's more complex. If you think of our own life, death, what other situation, there's not a simple answer. So I think we all grapple. I don't think almost when we talk about change, I think where the original question on the constant comes from. It almost feels slightly positive to me because you try to make it out positive. You have to adapt to change. But it's actually, if you also look at geopolitics of late, quite frankly, I think we never expected our world changing, but not for the better, for the worse overnight. And even the fundamental of ethics being thrown out, that almost a country is literally eradicating large part of its own constitution overnight. So again, uncertainty. That's almost what I feel the real constant is. But again, we also back to all of the points we have discussed, because in those worlds of uncertainty, people looking for more constant, I think they need more realistic guidance out there. And I feel if we do our jobs well as analysts and consultants, that's where we can have people, because the uncertainties, it's at least it's the highest, even beyond quipping, beyond just almost personal experience, but it's probably the highest level of uncertainty in our lifetime. And so if anything, perhaps sometimes having a wider time horizons to draw back on, even though some failed methodologies of being a historian can help in the time. So for me, it's uncertainty.
That's a really great constant, and it also says a lot about how we need to instruct ourselves in the future from constantly looking at this uncertainty and trying to find a way in that we cannot necessarily see.
Thanks for having me, and a great job educating some of our industry.
Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you for being here.
Great to talk to you.
Thank you for listening. If you liked this episode, share it with a friend or a colleague.